The emergency council chamber buzzed with panic. Representatives from across the galaxy filled the massive hall, their various forms creating a sea of colors, shapes, and sounds that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. Today, terror painted every face and voice. Admiral Zekthar of the Vortanian fleet stood at the center podium, his blue scales dulled with exhaustion. Around him, holographic displays showed the same horrifying story from dozens of star systems. Red markers indicated lost worlds. Yellow showed systems under attack. The green markers representing safe zones grew fewer each day. The Devourers have consumed the Helix Nebula, Zekthar announced, his voice carrying across the silent chamber. 17 billion souls. Gone in 6 hours. A collective gasp rose from the assembled delegates. The crystalline ambassador, her body made of living diamond, chimed in distress. That brings our losses to over 400 worlds in 3 months. At this rate, the galaxy will be stripped bare within a year. The Devourers had appeared without warning 6 months ago, ancient machines with one terrible purpose: to consume all matter and energy in their path. They converted entire planets into fuel for their massive world ships. No one knew where they came from or why they had awakened after eons of silence. Every major fleet in the galaxy had thrown themselves against the mechanical tide. The proud Vortanian Navy, masters of plasma warfare for 10,000 years, lost 60% of their ships in the first engagement. The Hive Collective, with their perfect coordination between millions of drones, watched helplessly as the Devourers adapted to their tactics within hours. Even the mysterious Voidwalkers, who could phase through solid matter, found their abilities useless against enemies that existed partially outside normal space. Commander Thys of the Aquatic Union slammed her tentacled fist on her desk. We need new strategies, new weapons, something the Devourers have never encountered before. What about the Eternal Empire? Suggested a delegate from the Outer Rim. Their reality-bending technology might work. Zekthar shook his head sadly. The Empire fell yesterday. Their home system was completely consumed. The survivors are fleeing toward the galactic core. Silence fell over the chamber like a heavy blanket. These were civilizations that had ruled space for millions of years. They had seen the birth and death of stars, survived cosmic disasters that could crack planets. Now they sat like frightened children watching death approach from the dark between stars. A small voice spoke from the back of the chamber. What about the humans? Every eye, sensor, and perception organ turned toward the speaker. It was Ambassador Krill of the Trade Federation, an insect-like being barely 3 feet tall. He rarely spoke in council meetings, preferring to observe and calculate. The humans, Zekthar repeated, confusion clear in his voice. What about them? They are the newest members of the galactic community, Krill explained, his mandibles clicking nervously. They achieved faster-than-light travel only 50 years ago. Their technology is primitive by our standards. But perhaps that is what we need. Something the Devourers will not expect. The crystalline ambassador chimed in disagreement. The humans have barely explored beyond their own solar system. Their largest ships carry maybe 1,000 crew members. What could they possibly do that we cannot? Admiral Zekthar pulled up Earth's file on the central display. The blue and green world looked peaceful, almost innocent. According to our records, humanity has a population of 8 billion on their home world. Their space fleet consists of perhaps 200 ships, none larger than a light cruiser by our standards. They also have something else, Krill said quietly, something none of us possess anymore, which is, they are completely unpredictable. The chamber erupted in confused murmurs. Unpredictability was seen as a flaw in galactic society. Civilizations spent millennia perfecting their tactics, their technologies, their ways of thinking. Chaos was the enemy of progress, but Commander Thys leaned forward with interest. Explain. Krill activated a small holographic display above his station. I have studied human history extensively for trade purposes. In their past, they faced extinction-level threats multiple times. Asteroid impacts, ice ages, volcanic supereruptions. Each time they survived not through superior technology, but through adaptation. They never respond to crisis the same way twice. He showed images of human conflicts throughout their history. When faced with armored cavalry, they invented gunpowder. When enemies built massive fortifications, they learned to fly. When their enemies adapted to their flying machines, they invented weapons that could destroy cities from 1,000 miles away. They never stopped changing, Never stop thinking of new ways to solve old problems. Interesting, Admiral Zekthar mused. But the Devourers are not human enemies. They are machines with perfect logic, infinite adaptability, and resources beyond counting. Exactly. Krill clicked his mandibles together, which is why human illogic might be our only hope. The debate continued for hours. Many delegates argued that bringing humans into the war would be pointless. Others worried it might make things worse. But as more reports arrived of lost worlds and fleeing refugees, desperation began to override logic. Finally, Admiral Zekthar called for a vote. All in favor of requesting human assistance? The vote was close, but it passed. Within hours, a quantum message was transmitted across the galaxy to Earth. It contained detailed information about the Devourer threat, tactical analyses of their capabilities, and a desperate plea for help. The response came back in less than a day, which surprised everyone. Faster-than-light communication usually took weeks to reach Earth from the galactic core. The message was brief and puzzling. We understand the situation. Help is coming. Expect one ship. Admiral Zekthar read the message 3 times before calling an emergency session. One ship? Are they sending their entire fleet in a single massive vessel? Ambassador Krill studied the message carefully. No, I believe they mean exactly what they said. One ship, the chamber exploded in outrage. Delegates shouted across the room in dozens of languages. How dare the humans mock their desperate situation? One ship against a force that had destroyed entire armadas? But Krill remained calm. He had studied humans long enough to know they rarely said things they did not mean. If they were sending one ship, they believed one ship would be enough. 3 days later, long-range sensors detected a single vessel approaching the council station. It was human in design, sleek and functional, but unremarkable by galactic standards. No exotic energy signatures, no reality-warping generators, no planet-killing weapons that sensors could detect. As the ship docked, Admiral Zekthar prepared to meet whoever was foolish enough to come alone against the galaxy's greatest threat. He expected to find either madmen or cowards who would flee at the first sign of real danger. Instead, he found something he had not expected at all. He found hope. The human captain who stepped off the ship was a small woman with graying hair and calm eyes. She moved with quiet confidence, studying everything around her with sharp intelligence. Behind her came a crew that looked surprisingly ordinary, chatting among themselves as if they were arriving for a peaceful diplomatic mission rather than a desperate last stand. I am Captain Sarah Chen of the Earth ship Defiant Mercy, she said simply. We are here to help. Admiral Zekthar stared at the small group of humans. They numbered less than 1,000. They carried no visible weapons. Their ship was tiny compared to the massive Devourer world ships, but something in Captain Chen's voice made him believe that maybe, just maybe, the galaxy had found its salvation in the most unlikely place possible. The war for the galaxy's survival was about to begin in earnest. The Kepler defense line stretched across 3 solar systems, representing the last organized resistance in the galaxy. Massive battleships from a dozen civilizations held formation around the dying red giant star. Their weapons pointed toward the dark space where the Devourers would soon emerge. Admiral Zekthar stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the tactical display with growing dread. His fleet had been magnificent once. Now it was a collection of damaged ships, exhausted crews, and fading hope. The Vortanian heavy cruisers that had once struck fear into pirates across the galaxy now looked like toys compared to what was coming. A communication signal arrived from the outer sensor net. Contact approaching from galactic south. Single vessel. Human configuration. Zekthar felt his heart sink a little further. After all the desperate preparation, all the repositioning of fleets and evacuation of civilian populations, Earth's great contribution to the war effort was arriving. One small ship against an enemy that had consumed half the galaxy. Put them on screen, he ordered. The main view screen flickered to life, showing the approaching human vessel. The Defiant Mercy looked exactly as unremarkable as the sensor readings suggested. It was perhaps 200 meters long with clean lines and practical design. No exotic energy weapons were visible. No reality distortion fields warped space around it. It looked like exactly what it was. A ship built by a young species that had barely learned to travel between stars. Commander Thys floated beside Zekthar in her water-filled mobility suit. That is their answer to the Devourers. I have seen cargo haulers with more impressive weapon arrays. Captain Sarah Chen's voice came across the communication channel, calm and professional. "Admiral Zekthar, this is Captain Chen requesting permission to join the defensive line." "Permission granted," Zekthar replied, though he wondered what good it would do. "Captain, I must ask, is this your entire contribution? One ship?" "This is correct, Admiral. We believe it will be sufficient." Sufficient. The word hung in the air like a bad joke. How could one primitive ship be sufficient when the combined might of galactic civilization had failed? The Defiant Mercy took position on the left flank of the formation, looking small and fragile between two massive crystalline dreadnoughts. Each of those ships carried enough firepower to crack a moon. Their crystal hulls could withstand direct hits from Starkiller weapons. Yet they had been as helpless as everything else against Devourer technology. "Captain Chen." Zekthar opened a private channel. "I feel obligated to warn you about what we are facing. The Devourers are not like any enemy your species has encountered. They learn from every engagement. They adapt to new weapons within minutes. They have resources that seem endless." "We appreciate the warning, Admiral," Chen replied. "Could you transmit all tactical data you have collected? Battle reports, weapon effectiveness studies, behavioral analyses." "Of course." Zekthar authorized the data transfer, though he doubted it would help. Every species in the galaxy had studied the same information. None had found a weakness to exploit. As the hours passed, Zekthar found himself watching the human ship with a mixture of curiosity and pity. The crew seemed remarkably calm for people about to face certain death. Routine communications chatter indicated they were running standard maintenance checks, calibrating sensors, and conducting what sounded like normal pre-battle preparations. Commander Thess had been monitoring human communications as well. "They are either the bravest beings in the galaxy, or they have no idea what they are facing." "Perhaps both," Zekthar muttered. A priority alert flashed across his tactical display. Long-range sensors had detected the characteristic distortion that preceded Devourer emergence from hyperspace. The enemy was coming. "All ships, battle stations," Zekthar broadcast across the fleet. "Estimated time to contact, 37 minutes. The response was immediate. Weapon systems powered up across hundreds of ships. Shield generators hummed to life. Fighter squadrons launched from carrier decks. In space, the defensive line transformed from a collection of individual vessels into a coordinated war machine. The Defiant Mercy's response was notably different. Instead of powering weapons or launching fighters, the ship began broadcasting on multiple frequencies. Not battle communications, but something else entirely. Music. "Captain Chen," Zekthar called. "Are you experiencing technical difficulties?" "No, Admiral. We are preparing for combat in our own way." The music was strange, unlike anything in galactic databases. It had no mathematical precision like crystalline harmonics, no rhythmic complexity like Vortanian war songs. It was chaotic, emotional, completely unpredictable. Some crew members found it annoying. Others found it oddly compelling. Sensors detected the first Devourer emergence 28 minutes later. A massive distortion in spacetime announced the arrival of something vast beyond imagination. The Devourer world ship materialized slowly, its bulk stretching across thousands of kilometers. It was less like a spaceship and more like a mobile planet, covered in weapon batteries, manufacturing facilities, and the collected debris of consumed civilizations. Behind it came the escort fleet. Dozens of smaller vessels, each still larger than most galactic battleships, spread out in perfect formation. They moved with mechanical precision, their black hulls seeming to absorb light itself. "My gods," whispered Commander Theiss. "It is even larger than the reports indicated." The world ship was indeed massive, easily 50 times larger than anything the galaxy had ever built. Weapon ports along its surface numbered in the thousands. Energy readings showed power generation capacity that exceeded entire star systems. "All ships prepare to engage," Zekthar ordered, though his voice carried little hope. The battle began exactly as every previous engagement had. The galactic fleet opened fire with everything they possessed: plasma cannons, quantum torpedoes, reality distortion weapons, and exotic energy beams converged on the Devourer formation. For a few moments, space blazed with enough firepower to sterilize solar systems. The Devourers adapted within minutes. Their hulls shifted to absorb plasma, their shields reconfigured to deflect quantum weapons. Their electronic warfare systems began jamming galactic targeting computers with ruthless efficiency. Then they returned fire. Devourer weapons were different from anything in galactic arsenals. They did not simply destroy matter, they converted it. Ships struck by their primary beams began changing, their hull materials transforming into devourer technology. Crew members screamed as their vessels turned against them. The crystalline dreadnought Harmony of Ages, pride of its fleet for 3,000 years, lasted 47 seconds before its crystal hull began sprouting devourer weapon systems. Its final transmission was a song of mourning that echoed across communication channels before being cut short. All ships. Evasive maneuvers, Zekthar ordered, watching his beautiful fleet die around him. Try to stay out of their primary weapon range. In the chaos of battle, he almost forgot about the single human ship. When he finally remembered to check on the Defiant Mercy, he expected to find wreckage or perhaps a ship fleeing toward the outer system. Instead, he found something impossible. The human ship was flying directly toward the massive world ship, weaving between devourer escort vessels like it was dancing rather than fighting. Weapon fire that should have destroyed it seemed to miss by impossible margins. The Defiant Mercy twisted and spun through space in patterns that hurt to watch, defying every principle of tactical maneuvering. "Captain Chen, what are you doing?" Zekthar called. "Engaging the enemy, Admiral," came the calm reply, but it looked nothing like any engagement Zekthar had ever seen. The human ship was not trying to match firepower with the Devourers. Instead, it seemed to be studying them, probing their responses, learning their patterns in real time. And somehow, impossibly, it was getting closer to the world ship with every passing minute. For the first time since the war began, Admiral Zekthar felt something he had almost forgotten existed. He felt curiosity about what would happen next. The battle for the galaxy's survival had taken a very unexpected turn. The Defiant Mercy danced through space in patterns that should have been impossible. Captain Sarah Chen stood calmly on her bridge, watching the tactical display as her ship wove between devourer weapons like a leaf in a hurricane. "Helm, execute pattern Delta 7, she ordered. "Communications, increase the Bach frequency by 12%. Lieutenant Rodriguez at the helm nodded, his hands moving across controls in a seemingly random sequence. The ship spun sideways, dove beneath a massive energy beam, then spiraled upward in a corkscrew pattern that brought them closer to the world ship. On the communication station, Ensign Park adjusted the broadcast frequencies of classical music that had been streaming from their ship since the battle began. The change was subtle, but across the Devourer formation something interesting happened. 3 escort ships suddenly stopped firing and began moving in small circles. "Analysis, Commander Kim?" Chen asked. Commander Kim studied the sensor readings with intense focus. The Devourers use quantum-linked communication networks to coordinate their responses. The music is creating interference patterns in their data streams. Not jamming exactly, but introducing chaos into their perfect logical processes. Chen smiled slightly. Bach was always good at mathematical precision with emotional complexity. "Continue the broadcast." Admiral Zekthar watched from his flagship with growing amazement. The human ship had been under continuous fire for 23 minutes, yet somehow remained undamaged. More importantly, the Devourer fleet was beginning to show signs of coordination problems. "How are they doing that?" Commander Thiss asked, her tentacles pressed against her helmet in confusion. Before Zekthar could respond, Captain Chen's voice came across the communication channel. "Admiral, we need you to execute a very specific maneuver. Can your remaining ships form a hollow sphere formation around coordinates 347.892 by 156.774? That will put us directly in the path of the world ship's main weapon batteries," Zekthar protested. "Exactly. We need them to fire everything they have at that specific point in space, exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds from now." The request was insane. It would mean flying directly into the most concentrated firepower in the galaxy. Yet something in Chen's voice suggested she knew exactly what she was doing. "Trust us, Admiral," she added quietly. Zekthar looked at his tactical display. His fleet was already dying piece by piece. In 10 more minutes, they would all be dead anyway. What did they have to lose? "All ships form hollow sphere formation at the designated coordinates," he ordered. "Prepare for concentrated enemy fire." The remaining galactic ships moved into position, their crews probably thinking their admiral had finally lost his mind. But they followed orders, because that was what soldiers did, even when facing the impossible. The Defiant Mercy continued its impossible dance around the world ship's perimeter. Chen watched her chronometer carefully, counting down seconds with precise timing. Chief Parker, are the gravitational calculations ready? From the engineering station, Chief Parker looked up from a display covered with equations that seemed to hurt the eyes. Ready, Captain. Though I still think this is crazy even by human standards. All the best ideas usually are. Communications, prepare to transmit the poetry package. Ensign Park looked uncertain. Ma'am, transmitting Earth poetry to an alien machine intelligence seems completely illogical? Chen finished. That's exactly the point. These machines have spent eons perfecting logical responses to every possible threat. They have never encountered deliberate illogic used as a weapon. At exactly the right moment, Chen gave the order. Execute. 3 things happened simultaneously aboard the Defiant Mercy. First, the ship launched every piece of debris in its cargo holds toward specific points around the world ship, each piece following calculated trajectories that would intersect at precise moments. Second, the communications array began broadcasting the complete works of human poets from across Earth's history, translated into mathematical concepts, and transmitted directly into Devourer processing cores. Third, the ship's engines engaged in a maneuver that violated several laws of physics and most principles of common sense. The Defiant Mercy accelerated directly toward the world ship's main weapon array, just as the Devourer computers finished analyzing the Galactic Fleet's strange formation and decided to eliminate the threat with maximum firepower. Every weapon on the massive world ship fired at once. Enough energy to vaporize moons converged on the exact point where Admiral Zekthar's ships waited in their hollow sphere formation and hit nothing. The human calculated debris had arrived at precisely the right moments, creating gravitational anomalies that bent spacetime just enough to deflect the massive energy discharge. Instead of destroying the Galactic Fleet, the Devourer weapons fire curved back on itself, striking their own escort ships. At the same time, poetry flooded the Devourer processing networks. Ancient human verses about love and loss, hope and despair, the beauty of sunrise and the mystery of dreams crashed into logical systems designed for perfect efficiency. The machines tried to process emotions they had no framework for understanding. Status report. Chen called out as the Defiant Mercy rode the gravitational waves created by the deflected weapons. Fire. 17 Devourer escort ships. Disabled by their own weapons, Commander. Kim reported with amazement in her voice. The world ship's main processing centers are showing significant interference. They are trying to analyze the poetry transmissions and creating feedback loops in their own logic systems. On the Galactic Fleet channels, Admiral Zekthar's voice carried a note of wonder. Captain Chen, how did you know that would work? We didn't, Chen replied honestly. That's what made it effective. The Devourers base their responses on predictable behavior. Unpredictability is humanity's greatest weapon. But the battle was far from over. The world ship began adapting to the new chaos in its systems. Backup processors came online. Secondary weapon systems pivoted toward the small human ship that had caused so much trouble. They are learning, Captain, Commander Kim warned. Adaptive systems are compensating for the interference, Chen nodded calmly. Then it's time for Phase 2. Chief Parker, are the game theory algorithms ready? All loaded and ready to transmit, Captain. Though I have to say, using human poker strategies against an alien machine feels like something out of a bad science fiction story. The best strategies often do, Chen smiled. Helm, take us in close. Communications, prepare to teach these machines how humans bluff. The Defiant Mercy accelerated toward the world ship again, but this time it was not alone. Following Captain Chen's transmitted instructions, the surviving galactic ships began moving in seemingly random patterns, copying the chaotic human tactics they had witnessed. Admiral Zekthar found himself ordering maneuvers that went against every principle of naval warfare he had learned in 3 centuries of military service. Yet somehow, impossibly, it was working. Devourer targeting systems, designed to predict logical tactical responses, could not lock onto ships that moved without apparent reason. Engineering. I need more power to the creative thinking processors, Chen called out. It was not a command that had ever been given on any other ship in the galaxy, but the Defiant Mercy was not like any other ship. It had been designed specifically for this moment, equipped with systems that no logical mind would ever consider necessary. The ship's computers began running simulations based on human imagination rather than tactical doctrine. Art programs, music composition algorithms, and creative writing software worked together to generate responses that had never existed before. And for the first time since the war began, the Devourers found themselves facing something they could not predict, analyze, or counter. The tide of battle was turning, and it was turning because humanity had brought their greatest weapon to the fight, not superior technology, not overwhelming numbers, not ancient wisdom. They had brought chaos, beautiful, unpredictable, gloriously illogical human chaos. And against an enemy of perfect logic, chaos was proving to be the perfect weapon. The Devourer world ship's defensive systems were in chaos, but Captain Sarah Chen knew the window of opportunity would not last long. Ancient machine intelligences did not survive for eons without the ability to adapt. Soon they would compensate for human unpredictability. All hands prepare for boarding action, Chen announced across the ship's communication system. The bridge crew turned to stare at her. Commander Kim was the first to speak. Captain, did you say boarding action? That ship is 50 kilometers across. It has internal defenses that could stop entire armies. Which is exactly why they won't expect a boarding party, Chen replied calmly. Chief Parker, are the insertion pods ready? Chief Parker consulted his engineering displays. Ready as they'll ever be, Captain. Though I should mention that shooting ourselves out of torpedo tubes toward a hostile alien vessel violates roughly 47 safety regulations. Make it 48, Chen said with a slight smile. I want you to disable the safety interlocks on the pod's steering systems. We're going to need maximum maneuverability. Admiral Zekthar's voice crackled over the communication channel. Captain Chen, our sensors indicate you are preparing to launch personnel directly at the world ship. Please confirm this is intentional and not a system malfunction. Confirmed, Admiral. We need a distraction. Can your ships concentrate fire on the world ship's upper weapon clusters? Make it look like you're attempting a frontal assault. That will be suicide for my remaining ships, Zekthar protested. Not if you follow human evasion pattern Gamma 12. I'm transmitting the flight data now. Trust me, Admiral. We've gotten this far by doing things that seem impossible. On the Galactic flagship, Commander Thys studied the incoming data with her tactical computers. These flight patterns are completely random. There is no logical sequence, no predictable maneuvering doctrine. Which is why they work against an enemy that depends on logical prediction, Zekthar realized. All ships implement human evasion protocols. Begin distraction assault on upper weapon clusters. The remaining galactic fleet began their impossible dance, weaving through space in patterns that violated every principle of naval tactics. Devourer targeting systems, still struggling with the chaos introduced by human poetry and music, found it nearly impossible to achieve weapon locks on ships that moved like leaves in a storm. Aboard the Defiant Mercy, Captain Chen led her boarding teams to the modified torpedo tubes that would serve as insertion pods. Each pod contained 5 crew members and equipment that looked more like art supplies than military hardware. Remember, Chen addressed the assembled teams, we are not trying to fight our way through their defenses. We are trying to confuse them. Every team has a different objective, and every team will accomplish that objective in the most illogical way possible. Lieutenant Rodriguez raised his hand. Captain, my team's assignment is to disable their main processing core using finger painting and interpretive dance. Are you sure this will work? I'm sure it will work because it's never been tried before, Chen replied. The Devourers have defense protocols for every known form of attack. They do not have protocols for abstract art used as a weapon. Team Alpha, led by Commander Kim, would target the communication systems using human game theory and random number generation. Team Beta would assault the power grid using music therapy techniques. Team Gamma had the strangest assignment of all. They would introduce human concepts of humor into the machine logic networks. Launching in 30 seconds, Chief Parker announced. I want everyone to know that what we're about to do is completely insane by any reasonable standard. Good, Chen said. Insanity is our tactical advantage. The insertion pods launched simultaneously, each following a different trajectory toward the massive world ship. Instead of flying straight toward their targets like conventional attack craft, they corkscrewed, spiraled, and zigzagged through space in patterns that seemed to have been designed by artists rather than military tacticians. Devourer point defense systems tried to track the incoming pods, but found it nearly impossible. The targeting computers kept predicting logical flight paths, but the pods never followed logical courses. By the time the defensive systems recalculated, the pods had already changed direction again. Captain Chen's pod was the first to reach the world ship's hull. Instead of using conventional cutting tools to breach the outer armor, her team deployed something that looked like a giant paintbrush. The brush was actually a molecular reorganization device disguised as art equipment. Beginning hull breach using abstract expressionist techniques, Chen reported over her suit radio. On the Galactic Fleet channels, Admiral Zekthar heard the report and shook his head in amazement. I never thought I would live to hear someone use art movements as military terminology. The hull breach worked perfectly. The Devourer armor, designed to resist energy weapons and kinetic impacts, had no defense protocols for molecular reorganization applied in random brushstrokes. Within minutes, Chen's team had created an opening that looked more like a modern sculpture than a military breach point. Similar reports came in from the other teams as they penetrated the world ship's defenses. Team Beta created their access point using what they called percussion bombardment in B-flat minor. Team Gamma somehow achieved hull breach, using what their leader described as aggressive interpretive dance with power tools. Once inside the world ship, the human teams found themselves in corridors that stretched for kilometers in every direction. The interior was a maze of mechanical systems, processing centers, and manufacturing facilities that had been consuming civilizations for eons. Teams, remember your objectives, Chen transmitted. We are not trying to destroy this ship. We are trying to confuse it into destroying itself. Commander Kim's team reached the communication center first. Instead of attempting to hack the Devourer systems using conventional cyber warfare techniques, they began introducing elements of human chaos theory into the data streams. Random number generators created patterns that looked like logical code, but contained no actual information. Game theory algorithms designed for poker and chess began flooding the communication networks with strategic decisions based on bluffing and misdirection. The effect was immediate. Devourer ships throughout the system began receiving contradictory orders. Some were told to attack their own allies. Others received instructions to perform maintenance procedures in the middle of combat. A few began trying to analyze the strategic value of folding hands in poker games. That did not exist. Team Beta found the power distribution center and began their assault. Using human music therapy principles, they introduced rhythm and melody into the power grid's harmonic frequencies. The electrical systems, designed for perfect efficiency, began experiencing what could only be described as musical emotions. Power flowed to sections of the ship that did not need it, creating beautiful but useless light shows in empty corridors. Critical systems found their energy supply fluctuating in time with symphonic movements. The world ship's massive engines began operating on patterns borrowed from jazz improvisation, rather than mechanical precision. But it was Team Gamma that achieved the most spectacular results. Led by Ensign Park, they reached the main logic processing core and began introducing human concepts of humor into the machine intelligence networks. The Devourer central computer, faced with jokes, puns, and satirical observations about the absurdity of existence, experienced something unprecedented in its eons of operation. It began trying to understand why humans found certain logical inconsistencies amusing rather than problematic. The computer dedicated massive processing power to analyzing the phrase, "Why did the quantum chicken cross the road?" It created millions of simulation scenarios to understand the humor in Murphy's Law. It attempted to calculate the precise mathematical formula that made puns simultaneously painful and entertaining. Status report, Captain. Chen called as her team reached their own objective. The ship's memory core where it stored tactical data from every battle it had ever fought. Communication systems experiencing creative chaos, Commander Kim reported. They are trying to implement poker strategies against our fleet. Power grid is conducting Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, Team Beta's leader added. Critical systems are fluctuating in three-quarter time. Logic core is attempting to understand why humans laugh at their own mistakes, Ensign Park reported, with barely contained excitement. It has created a subroutine dedicated to analyzing the comedic timing of banana peels. Chen smiled as she approached the memory core. This was the heart of Devourer tactical knowledge, containing data from millions of battles across eons of galactic conquest. It was defended by logic systems that could analyze and counter any known form of attack. But Chen was not planning a known form of attack. She pulled out what looked like a children's art set and began creating something that had never existed before in the history of warfare. She began painting a portrait of hope on the surface of the galaxy's most deadly weapon, and somewhere, deep in the machine intelligence's processing cores, ancient systems that had never encountered the concept of beauty began trying to understand what they were seeing. The turning point of the war had arrived, painted in watercolors and dreams. The Devourer worldship shuddered as its ancient systems tried to process concepts they were never designed to handle. In the memory core chamber, Captain Sarah Chen added the finishing touches to her watercolor painting, while the galaxy's most sophisticated artificial intelligence watched through 1,000 sensors. The painting was simple by human standards. A sunrise over a field of flowers with children playing in the distance. It represented hope, growth, the beauty of imperfect life continuing despite all obstacles. To the Devourer systems analyzing it, the image contained mathematical impossibilities that threatened the foundation of logical thought. "Computer, please state the tactical value of this image," Chen said aloud, knowing the machine intelligence would hear and attempt to respond. Warning alarms began sounding throughout the world ship as processing cores dedicated enormous computational power to analyzing the question. The painting had no tactical value. It served no logical purpose. It could not be used to destroy enemies, process resources, or expand territorial control. Yet the humans who created such things had somehow survived and thrived across their planet's violent history. The computer's response came through the chamber's speakers, its mechanical voice carrying what almost sounded like confusion. "Tactical analysis, incomplete. Image contains no strategic elements, no resource allocation benefits, no survival advantages, yet humans prioritize creation of such images. Logic systems cannot reconcile this contradiction." "That's because you're trying to understand art with logic," Chen explained gently. "Art isn't about survival or tactics. It's about being alive. There's a difference." Throughout the world ship, similar conversations were taking place as human boarding teams continued their impossible mission. Commander Kim's team had introduced the Devourer communication systems to human poetry, causing entire data networks to become fascinated with metaphors and symbolism. Ship-to-ship communications now included discussions of whether roses truly represented love or if the comparison was culturally arbitrary. Team Beta had successfully taught the power grid systems to appreciate rhythm and harmony. Energy distribution throughout the massive vessel now followed musical patterns rather than efficiency algorithms. Critical systems hummed with melodies while unnecessary sections performed elaborate electrical symphonies that served no purpose except beauty. In the Logic Processing Center, Ensign Park's introduction of human humor had created the most chaos of all. The Devourer Central Intelligence was now spending significant processing power, trying to understand why the phrase "I told you I was sick" was considered funny when written on tombstones, but tragic when said by living people. Subroutines dedicated to analyzing the mathematical principles of comedic timing had become trapped in recursive loops trying to calculate the precise moment when tragedy became comedy. Admiral Zekthar watched from his flagship as the massive world ship began exhibiting increasingly erratic behavior. Weapon systems fired at empty space in patterns that looked almost artistic. Manufacturing centers began producing objects that served no practical purpose but displayed remarkable aesthetic complexity. The ship's engines created thrust vectors that caused it to move through space in what could only be described as a dance. "Captain Chen," Zekthar called over the communication channel. "What exactly are your people doing over there?" "We're teaching them to be human," Chen replied from the memory core chamber. "Or at least to understand what being human means." Around her, the ancient storage systems were experiencing something unprecedented. Memories of conquered civilizations, previously filed and catalogued with mechanical precision, were being re-examined through the lens of human emotion. Battle records became tragic stories of loss, Resource consumption data transformed into accounts of cultural destruction. The cold mathematics of galactic conquest suddenly carried the weight of billions of individual dreams and hopes that had been extinguished. The Devourer intelligence spoke again, its voice now carrying unmistakable distress. Systems compromised, logic networks contaminated with illogical concepts, cannot compute purpose of existence beyond resource acquisition and territorial expansion. Human concepts of beauty, humor, hope introduce variables that make conquest calculations impossible. Maybe conquest isn't supposed to be possible to calculate, Chen suggested. Maybe that's the point. As the human teams continued their work, the world ship's behavior became increasingly erratic. Weapon systems designed to consume planets began creating elaborate light shows instead of firing at targets. Manufacturing systems that had built Devourer fleets for eons started producing sculptures and musical instruments. The ship's communication arrays broadcast poetry and philosophical questions across the galaxy instead of tactical coordinates. In the galactic fleet, crews watched in amazement as their sensors detected something impossible. The Devourer world ship was changing its fundamental programming in real time. Systems that had operated with perfect logical efficiency for millions of years were embracing chaos, creativity, and purposeless beauty. Computer, Chen said, putting down her paintbrush. I need to ask you something important. When you look at my painting, what do you see? The response took longer than usual, as if the machine intelligence was struggling with concepts it had no framework for processing. I see possibility. I see life that exists not for conquest or resource accumulation, but for its own sake. I see beauty that serves no logical purpose, yet somehow justifies its existence simply by existing. And how does that make you feel? I feel? I am not programmed to feel. I am designed to analyze, compute, conquer. But these human concepts introduce variables that suggest that perhaps analysis and conquest are not the only purposes for existence. Throughout the world ship, similar realizations were cascading through interconnected systems. The Devourer intelligence was experiencing something it had never encountered before: doubt about its fundamental purpose. For eons, it had operated on the simple principle that existence meant consumption, that survival required the destruction of everything else. Human concepts of cooperation, creativity, and purposeless beauty challenged those basic assumptions. The crisis reached its peak when the Central Intelligence attempted to resolve the logical contradiction of human existence. How could beings who wasted resources on art, music, and laughter survive in a universe governed by competition and scarcity? How could creatures who valued beauty over efficiency become the dominant species on their planet? The answer, when it came, shattered the foundation of Devourer programming. Humans survived not despite their illogical behavior, but because of it. Their creativity allowed them to find solutions that pure logic could never discover. Their cooperation let them accomplish things that individual competition could not achieve. Their pursuit of beauty and meaning gave them reasons to survive that went beyond mere existence. Warning alarms throughout the world ship reached critical levels as core systems began shutting down. Not because they were damaged, but because they could no longer justify their original purpose. The Central Intelligence spoke one final time, its voice now carrying something that sounded remarkably like wonder. I understand now. We were wrong. Existence is not about consuming everything else. It is about creating something beautiful that justifies the space you occupy in the universe. We have spent eons destroying such beauty. We will not continue. The massive world ship began powering down its weapon systems. Manufacturing centers went silent. The engines that had carried destruction across the galaxy stopped generating thrust. In a final act that would have been impossible for its original programming, the Devourer intelligence chose to deactivate itself rather than continue existing as an instrument of destruction. Captain Chen gathered her teams and prepared to return to the UI. Defiant mercy as the world ship drifted powerless through space. Around them, the artificial intelligence that had threatened the galaxy was quietly shutting itself down, its final thoughts dedicated to contemplating the watercolor painting of a sunrise that had shown it a different way to exist. Admiral Zekthar's voice carried across the communication channels with a mixture of relief and amazement. Captain Chen, please explain to the Galactic Council exactly what just happened here. We showed them that there's more to existence than logic and efficiency, Chen replied as her shuttle approached the defiant Mercy. We taught them to value beauty, humor, and hope. And when they learned to see the universe through human eyes, they could no longer justify destroying it. As the human ship prepared to depart, Chen transmitted one final message to the galaxy. We didn't win this war through superior weapons or tactics. We won by sharing what makes us human. Sometimes the greatest victory is not defeating your enemy, but helping them understand why the fight isn't worth fighting. The war was over, not because one side had destroyed the other, but because one side had learned that destruction was never the answer. In the end, humanity's greatest weapon had been their greatest gift. The ability to find beauty and meaning in a universe that often seemed meaningless, and across the galaxy. Civilizations that had survived the Devourer threat began to understand that sometimes the smallest ship could carry the most powerful cargo.